Okay, we're making some pretty decent progress here, and today we're going to be talking about the powers of the presidency. What does the president do exactly? You want to be president of the United States? I know if I was standing next in front of you guys, there'd be at least two hands raised. So, for those two people, did you ever consider what exactly is in the job description of President of the United States? Like, what can the president actually do? Just like when you get a job one day, you'll be wondering what you can actually do. Well, let's explore that. So the president executes the laws because ultimately he's the one that signs them, doesn't make, signs them. So the president is the one who enforces the laws. And he also is the one to reject laws, known as the power of the veto, which is pretty self explanatory. If a bill tries to become a law, at the end of that cycle, step four, the president can veto it one of two ways. And if he does veto it, it doesn't become a law without the Senate getting 2/3 vote. Now, when it comes to vetoing, though, there's two types of vetoes, a pocket veto as well as a regular veto. But regardless of what veto it is, if the president wants to veto something, he's got to veto the entire bill. Even if he likes 99% of that bill, he's got to veto it if that 1% really, really bothers him. Now, one more thing just while I'm at it. This is a type of veto that a lot of people got wrong on their test. It functions like a normal veto, but this one can't be overridden. Why do you think that's the case? Well, once Congress is out of session, they're gone. So they can't override the president if they are not there to override the president. Anywho, another power the president has is the power to command the military. He's known as the commander in chief, meaning that if a man or a woman enlists in any of the armed forces, they're ultimately taking an oath to obey the orders of the President of the United States, who is the highest ranking officer of the military for all five branches of the military. Six of you include Space Force. Now, what does that ultimately mean? Well, the president is the head of it, but it's not like he's doing daily operations such as training troops or anything of that nature. Uh, he'll be more in charge of like long-term military goals as well as military tactics used. Example I'll give you guys was Truman and the atomic bomb. In World War II, we dropped two atomic bombs, one in Hiroshima, one in Nagasaki. The order came directly from President Harry S. Truman. No other military officer could have made that order. Here's a not so fun, but actually quite scary fact. When we were in the Korean War, General Douglas MacArthur, who was a very important general in World War II, was in charge of Korea, and he asked President Truman for the authorization to basically just nuke North Korea. He asked for a measly 34 nukes to get the job done quickly. And here's his logic behind it. Of all the campaigns of my life, 20 major ones to be exact, Korea was the one I felt most sure of was the one I was deprived of waging. I could have won the war in Korea in a maximum of 10 days. Would have dropped between 30 and 50 atomic bombs on his air bases and other depots strung across the neck of Manchuria. It was my plan as our amphibious forces moved south to spread behind us from the Sea of Japan to the Yellow Sea a belt of radioactive cobalt. It could have been spread from wagons, carts, trucks, and planes. For at least 60 years, there could have been no land invasion of Korea from the north. The enemy could not have marched across that radiated belt. Now, that actually is quite scary and terrifying, but maybe he was onto something if you think about our current relationship with North Korea. Now, can he declare war, though, being the president? Now, the president can deploy troops overseas, but in order to get approval for an all out war, Congress has to be the one to declare it. Last time we declared war was against Japan. So if you do the math, Korea, Vietnam, Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, Iraq, and more, those were all simply the president sending troops to an area for American interests. Moving on, though, next power, the power of appointment. Long story short, the president has the ability to give people jobs, specifically Supreme Court justices, cabinet members, and ambassadors to other nations. Now, is it as simple as the president saying, hey, you have a job? No. The Senate has to be the one to confirm all those positions. Part of the whole checks and balance thing. If you're wondering why the Constitution made it that way, well, honestly, a lot of the people the president picks is eventually on that list of potentially being the president one day. When you want to make sure someone else besides the president had a say in on that, Now, the next power is the power of removal. Just like if the president has the power to give people jobs, he also has the power to take them away. In the words of Donald Trump, you're fired. The president also has judicial powers, which translates to A, being able to give Supreme Court justices jobs, and B, being able to pardon anybody. If you commit a crime in the United States, if the president gives you a presidential pardon, you're free from any guilt that comes associated with that crime. Anyone, Mr. Shoens? Yes, including you, who hopefully never has to have one. Whether you're speeding down I-95, robbing a bank, cheating on a test, the president can forgive you for that crime and you are forgiven for it. That's known as the power of clemency, which, long story short, the president has the power to reprieve, which is postpone, or pardon, which is to forgive of any sentence for any crime. So if you receive a presidential pardon, you are free to go at that point. Some notable usages of clemency over the years was Nixon and Ford. Long story short, Nixon was pardoned by President Ford for the Watergate scandal. Water what? Right. Mr. Brown's 12th graders, who probably didn't learn anything about Watergate, and 11th graders of mine who probably don't remember seeing it last year in D.C. Long story short, during the early 1970s, during the presidential election, the DNC was meeting at Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C., and there was a burglary inside the hotel. Long story short, some people were trying to steal secrets in order to help Nixon get reelected, and once the smoke subsided, it was clear Nixon had used the office of the presidency to send those people to try to steal secrets to win reelection. Congress would have impeached him for it, but he did the classic "you can't fire me because I quit" tactic, which is fine, but that doesn't mean you get just out of all crimes you've committed. There was some real serious jail time waiting for Richard Nixon, but the new president decided to pardon Nixon and the other people involved with Watergate. He pretty much believed that it would be a national embarrassment for any of our presidents to be locked up, and because of that, Nixon served no jail time. He was pardoned. Now, if you're curious about amnesty, especially with recent news, long story short, amnesty is just pardoning a group of people, not just a specific person. Let's move on to executive orders. Now, the president has the ability to send and sign an executive order, which is basically a directive issued by the president that has the force of law. They don't look like this, they look like this. Long story short, the president can basically make a law on his own if he needs to. Let me give you an example. In a hypothetical situation, let's say I was the president of the United States, and I would look nothing like this really impressive baby in the suit. Regardless if you voted for me, respect the office. Now, if I was president of the United States, I would do two things. First, I'd put an executive order to ban scooters in Washington, D.C. for no apparent reason. And then if something crazy happened in the United States, like, say, an oil spill in West Palm Beach, Florida, where every second there's oil being polluted in our beautiful oceans, and baby seals and baby dolphins and baby bits of coral are all dying, which would all make for really bad TikTok videos. Well, if something like that were to happen, the natural response would be government should do something about that. And if they do, if you want government to do something about that, they would have to make a bill at that point. And they'd have to send it to committees. And then they would have to vote for it. And then it could be filibustered by Rand Paul. And then at that point, all the baby seals and baby dolphins and baby coral could all be dead. So the president has the ability to get something done quickly if it was really, really urgent. Now, is it constitutional? Short answer is yes. When the Constitution says that the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, that gives him the ability to grant orders to help in that department. And the Supreme Court has also ruled that it's constitution so long as it falls in line with the Constitution. If I was president and I made an executive order that says a Chick-fil-A should be built right outside of the White House, that'd be unconstitutional, and thusly I wouldn't be able to do it. And every president has used the executive order in some shape or form, except that guy. As stated before, he wasn't in there long enough. And they aren't absolute. Congress can override an executive order if they pass a law to do so, and the Supreme Court can also deem it as unconstitutional. Declaring a national emergency. Now I'm going to skip the remaining portions of the national emergency because there's no notes on that, but in case you're curious, especially with the whole coronavirus going around, Feel free to look at the slides I left on RenWeb. I have all the details in there that you'll need. But let's move on to another power such as executive privilege. Now, executive privilege grants the president the ability to withhold information for the good of the public. Now, you might think that this is a bit scandalous and also really sketchy, but there could be some really valid reasons why to withhold information for the good of the public. And I'll give you the atomic bomb as the example. If the Germans in World War II knew exactly how far along we were in this Manhattan Project, we would have seen a very, very different end of World War II. We may have even lost the war at that point. Instead of the Germans going east towards Russia, where they'd be met with millions of Russians who were crazy, they'd be heading west towards the U.S., and we would have dealt with a lot different war at that point. Moving on, though, the power to raise tariffs. Yeah, the president has the power to raise tariffs, which are taxes on industries. Relatively recently, about a year ago, Trump passed a tariff on the steel industry, 25%. But why, Mr. Shoens? I thought Congress had the ability to raise taxes and tariffs. It's one of the express powers. This is totally unconstitutional. The president doesn't have powers in Article 1, he has powers in Article 2, and taxes are in Article 1, which means the president should be impeached. Hashtag not my president. Well, anywho, you're right. The Commerce Clause in the Constitution does state that the legislative branch has the ability to do taxes, so you're not wrong in that department. Unfortunately for the legislative branch, over the years, they've basically given the president the ability to pass tariffs. They've passed laws that have given the president the ability to pass tariffs, such as the ones listed on the screen. So, long story short, without going into all of them, Congress gave him that power, which is really, really interesting. So the president does have the power to raise tariffs. And the last power that we'll focus in on, and there's a lot more powers to the presidency, but these are just some of the most important ones, the power to make treaties. The Constitution gives the president the ability to make treaties or formal agreements with other nations. So if like a big war happens, such as like World War I or World War II, the president is the one at the negotiation table. Now, those treaties aren't absolute. They got to be confirmed by the Senate by 2/3 votes. But as far as who's at the table negotiating, that's President of the United States. And that concludes at least this portion for the presidency. Next week, we're going to be talking about the bureaucracy and all the other things that go on in the executive branch that are not specifically in the White House.